네, 세 개 다 나오게 지금 연결 연결이 그리고 이거 하나 꽂아서 여기 스플리터에서 연결도 이거를 하고 여기서 어디에다 연결했으니까 이렇게 이거 다 저기 안에 있었거든요. 이거면 되네. 저거 이거 두 개는 되는데 얘가 안 되는데.
요즘 방송은 시작했습니다. 그 제가 한주 쌤한테 송출 링크 보내서 아마 인스타그램에도 하고 제대로
번역만 테스트 해보면 될것 같아요.
그 번역은 안 해봤는데 팀즈랑 그 유튜브랑 카메라를 같이 없어가지고 번역은 안 해봤는데 그래서 팀즈랑 송출을 해보고
송출은 안 돼. 그러니까 내는 필요 없고 여기 지금 되는데.
아 여기요?
그 의미가 없어. 어차피 송출은 안 돼. 그러니까 그날 강연장에 있는 사람만 사실 그 의미가 없어. 송출은 안 돼. 그날 강연장에 있는 사람만
I think you guys look still fine, so we might start maybe from today strongly, I guess. So I think I'm really happy to start our first keynote lecture from today. And we're gonna have 3 keynote lectures to support your design and your thinking about design and so. And we invited today from Yonsei University and Professor Yang Young-mi. And the Yang Young-mi is an associate professor in Department of Architecture and Architectural Engineering at Yonsei University. Her research focused on the modernization, industrialization, and colonization of cities and architecture in East Asia since the late 19th century, with particular attention to Seoul, Incheon, and Busan. So she examines the everyday lives of urban residents, transformation of the urban environment, and heritageations of industrial and urban heritage. So her books include Little Japan in Hansong-gu, in Jingogi or Honmatsu Incheon. So they are one of her books. And also walking through 100 years of history, co-author, and memory of modernity, industrial heritage, how the form industrial facility became cultural heritage. So we invite her in order to understand about early Seoul modernization era. So I think she prepared a lot actually, with books and handout and many presentations. So it would be nice chance to hear and understand about the early modernization era. So.
Sorry. Okay. Is it? 이거 빠졌어. 그거 어때요? 아닌가?
왜안 나와? 습관이겠지. 재원도 건드리지 말고 조금 들어가는 게 나을 것 같아. 시험이 이거 다시 안 되고 내가 써보겠어. Sorry, assistant. I don't know how she managed that. I think that's something not right.
됐다.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you all. I'm Young-mi, an architectural is titled Hybridity and Dynamism, Leading Modern Seoul. I will explain how Seoul has been shaped over the last 100 years through the 5 key themes: the inertia of Asian tradition, the arrival of external modernity, colonial power, war and reconstruction, and colonial nation building. So today is a megacity of nearly 10 million people, but just over 100 years ago, it was a world capital of the Joseon dynasty. This photograph was taken by Paolo Rossetti, an Italian journalist, in 1903. It shows Jeonyo. And in just 30 years, everything has changed like this. The streetscape, the architecture, and the people's clothing, all of it. Jongdo in 1972 and 1983 shows even more change. Trains have disappeared, the subway has emerged, and high-rise buildings now line the street. The transformation along Sejongdo, Seoul's most iconic boulevard, is equally dramatic. The broad avenue in front of Gwanghwamun, the main gate of the main gate of Gyeongbokgung Palace, was occupied after colonization by massive government general building. After liberation, a series of changes followed to reclaim this space, as you can see in these photographs. I will explain about it later. The Panorama of Seoul, photographed in 1929, had become a skyline of high-rise buildings by 2009. This transformation is not simply urban growth. It is the layered result of dynastic rule, colonial occupation, war, and economic growth. So today's lecture is structured in 3 parts. The first one, from traditional to modern, from 1882 to 1910. What kind of city was Hanseong, the Joseon capital, and what was the first impact of modernization? Second part is colonial modern city, Gweijo, from 1910 to 1945. How was Seoul reorganized under Japanese colonial rule? The third part is post-war reconstruction and economic development, the explosive growth of Seoul after 1945. How did Seoul become the city it is today after liberation? So let's start with the first part, from tradition to modern. To understand Seoul, we need to start with the foundational principles of East Asian city making. There is a book that codified these principles. It is called Gaokgongji, the 6th book of the Lives of Jew. This diagram illustrates these principles. Cities should be built as a square fortress like this. It's wide enough for 9 li, roughly 3.6 kilometers. 3 gates on 3 gates on each wall. 9 doors crossing horizontally and vertically. It's wide enough for 9 cars to pass. At the center, the royal palace. To the left, the royal ancestor Shorin, Jeongmyo, and to the right, the state altar, Saji. Administrative offices in front and the market to the left. How closely this idea was realized can be seen by comparing 3 capitals: Chang'an of the Tang Dynasty of China, Beijing under the Ming and Qing Dynasty, and Hanseong, the Joseon capital we now call Seoul. Chang'an of the Tang Dynasty is one of the most faithful realization of the Gaokgongji idea. Built around 582, it featured walls close to a perfect square. 3 gates on each side and a grid of 14 north side and 11 west roads, dividing the city into 108 square li-fang units. The central access road was 150 meters wide. Their work, however, differs from the idea. Imperial Palace was shifted northward like this, and the markets were placed south. There are 2 markets. Beijing developed a multi-layered structure on outer city, inner city, imperial city, and the forbidden city. In front of the forbidden city, there are ancestor shrines and state altars, Haemyeong and Saji. It is basically following Chuzhao Yishi. It means Chazhoucha, ancestor shrine on the left and state altar on the right. In 1392, Joseon Dynasty was founded. In 1393, Hanseong was designated the new capital. The actual relocation took place in 1394. But Hanseong was not a square because of the mountains. The fortress walls were built along the ridge lines of 4 surrounding mountains. Bugak Mountain, Namsan Mountain, Naksan, and Inangsan Mountain. The city was shaped by natural topography and 풍수지리, geometry, not a flat grid. 8 gates in total. So there are 4 main gates here and 4 small gates. So there are 8 gates. And there are 2 royal palaces. One is Gyeongbok Palace and the other is Changguk Palace. The Gyeongbok Palace is the main palace, and to the left of Gyeongbok Palace there is Jongmyo, and maybe it's better. So there is Jongmyo, and to the right, Saji. In short, Hanseong shaped the cosmological principles of East Asian capitals, but transformed them radically to fit its mountainous landscape and geometric principle. So the capital of the Joseon dynasty began to change in the late 19th century, as foreign residents started arriving in 1882. This map, made in 1902, shows the new pattern clearly, with some legations and residence areas in the Jeongdong district between Seodaemun Gate and Namdaemun Gate, near the Gyeongbokgung Palace. And Japanese legation and areas on the north slope of Namsan. And the Chinese, who had the closest ties with Joseon, setting along Namdaemun-do and around Myeongdong. As the map shows, foreign settlements were concentrated in the southern part of Seoul, away from the northern part, where the 2 palaces and ancestral shrines, state altar stood. The significance of these foreign settlements for Seoul's transformation lies in the unprecedented urban landscapes they created. Western-style buildings went up in Jeongdong. Japanese-style buildings appeared on the north slope of Namsan, and Chinese-style buildings spread through Myeongdong. The Western settlement in Jeongdong included not only the legations of various nations, Western nations, missionary churches and schools, but also Western-style halls built within Gyeongbokgung Palace, which became the main palaces of the Korean Empire after 1897. So they were built by the Emperor Gojong's will. The Japanese settlements, the largest one was characterized by Matsuya here, traditional Japanese merchant shop houses, and pseudo-Western style buildings, gyoku buildings, and hybrid Japanese West structures, together creating the distinct character of Japanese borough. The Japanese population grew explosively after their victories in Sino-Japanese and Russo-Japanese wars. This also led to rapid densification. Las was subdivided, and many long, narrow plots began to appear. Like this. As shown in this diagram, Las actually the original lot was this very large one. However, maybe after 10 years, only 10 years passed, but it was subdivided into a very small parts. This was a distinctive characteristic of Japanese settlements in contrast to Korean settlements in the late 19th century. The foreign settlements, especially the Japanese and Western powers, underwent a transformation very different from the rest of Seoul. So, yeah, there are very different scenes between Jongno and the other foreign settlements. Nevertheless, the main laws and overall urban structure of Seoul remained essentially unchanged. Jongno, Namdaemun-no, and Sejongno remained the dominant arteries. And the overall urban landscape was still one of mostly low-rise houses, with very few buildings of more than 2 stories. However, from the mid-1890s onward, Seoul began to change significantly. Accounts from foreign visitors to the late 19th century Seoul are very candid. Most alleys were so narrow that 2 rows of them could hardly pass. Open drains were filled with stagnant water, and the few children and dogs played alongside them. Koreans also began to recognize the importance of road improvement and urbanization. In 1896, the Chido 규칙 road improvement regulations were enacted, mandating street cleaning and prohibiting littering. Critics pointed out that such policies were followed unless the government first provided spaces for residents to dispose of their waste. The impact of modernization became much more pronounced after 1895. As you can see in these photographs, temporary market stores, so these are temporary market stores, it was called Kaga, were demolished, streets were widened like this, drainage systems were improved, roads were paved, and a streetcar line here was constructed. Jongno underwent the same changes. In 1899, both the railway and the streetcar began operation, and in 1907, the first water purification plant was built. As a result, Seoul rapidly acquired the infrastructure of modern city. Buildings along the main streets also changed. In response to urbanization, traditional Hanok around Namdaemun-do and Jongno were expanded into 2 stories. This building is one of the few that still survives today and is now used as a tea house. So if you have a chance, I highly recommend visiting it. It is very good place, and it is a Korean national heritage. During this period, the Korean Empire sought to modernize the capital by taking Western countries and Japan as model. However, these efforts could not be sustained because of intervention of the imperial powers and limited domestic capacity. This situation became even more complex under Japanese colonial law after 1910. In 1910, Korea was annexed by the Japanese Empire, and Hanseong-gu was renamed Taejo. After colonization, the Japanese government generally carried out urban improvement projects. It was modeled on Tokyo's urban improvement plans underway since 1888. The primary strategy was straightening existing laws and constructing new laws, like this. So this is Jongno, and this is Jongno, and this is Ujiro, and this is Chunguro, nowadays Chunguro. And this is the newly constructed Taepyeongdo. This diagram illustrates the urban improvement project. Before colonization, urban improvement had been carried out only in limited areas in Japanese settlement or near Gyeongbokgung Palace. However, under colonial law, they were expanded into a comprehensive plan for the entire street network like this. Seoul was originally a walled city because the city will follow the surrounding mountains. Only the sections around here, around only the sections across the flatlands, especially on the southwestern side, connecting to Yongsan, were demolished to make way for new roads, while many of the mountain sections survived. After 1904, Yongsan became a new urban center with the construction of Japanese military base and railway facilities. And it was incorporated into Taejo in 1911. In 1919, the plan was revised following the decision to construct the Government General Building in Gyeongbokgung Palace. Taepyeongdo, linking Gyeongbokgung Palace and Namdaemun, was also newly constructed in 1912. And around Ujiro, here, this is Ujiro, a radial street system was proposed, and public squares were planned in front of Gyeongbokgung City Hall and the Bank of Korea. However, the radial street plan was never fully implemented. So you can see the result of the urban improvement system. So the Jongno and Ujiro was straightened, and the Taepyeongdo was newly constructed. However, Honmachi, this is the nowadays Chunguro, and this street was occupied by Japanese merchants. So yeah, it could the improvement project could not be executed. This photograph clearly illustrates colonial Seoul after these transformations. We can see the newly built Taepyeongdo here, and the older here, Namdaemun-ro, and today's City Hall Plaza, and this is the Bank of Korea Plaza. At the time, it was called the Senkimai Plaza. In other words, the urban improvement project created the spectacle of the colonial city, broad streets and monumental public squares. As a result, streets that looked like this in the early 1900s had been transformed into this by the 1930s. This is a map of Seoul in 1927. We can clearly see the new streets, bars, public squares, and large modern buildings like this one. Okay, let's take a closer look at the cityscape. This is Sejonglo Street. You can see the general government building at the end of the street. And this is Taepyeonglo in the 1930s. Yeah, these two buildings are still remained. And this is the City Hall Plaza, and this is City Hall. Nowadays, Seoul Library. And this is Sinkingmai Plaza here. This is Mitsubishi Department Store, and this is Joseon Bank. Nowadays, a Bank of Korea. Streetcars and railways also became important elements of the modern urban landscape. Likewise, the large modern buildings lining the boulevards helped define the image of the modern city. So far, these characteristics are typical of modernization in many cities. However, this photograph tells a different story. It shows Namsan Cheoring here, completed 1 year before the government general building. The grand approach Omotesando to the Cheoring and the monumental Cheoring itself stood on Namsan together with the government general building dominating the skyline of Seoul. They became powerful urban symbols of colonial rule. Of course, the benefits of urban improvement were distributed unequally. This unequal distribution was reflected in the city's dual urban structure. Japanese residents were concentrated primarily in Namcheon, the southern district, below Cheonggye Stream, this is Cheonggye Stream, and Yongsan. Korean residents largely remained in Bukchon, the northern district in the traditional urban core. This map shows the percentage of Japanese residents by districts. So they were concentrated in Namcheon and in Yongsan. This part, the white one, is the Japanese military base, nowadays American military base. These two zones differed dramatically in modern infrastructure, building density, and typology and administrative treatment. This was not simply residential segregation, it was a spatial expression of unequal resources allocations, and urban power. Newspaper reports from 1924 also pointed to these inequalities. For example, Jongno, Seoul's traditional commercial district, contrasts sharply with Honmachi, the newly developed commercial district for Japanese residents. Yeah, this is Honmachi and this is Jongno. From these photographs, it is immediately clear which of the two was the more prosperous. So this is Honmachi. At that time, Honmachi's nickname was Keijo no Ginjo. Ginja of Seoul. Ginja is the most prosperous commercial district in Tokyo. Of course, by the mid-1930s, department stores, this is Hwasin department store, had appeared in Jongno as well, and it too became a fully modernized commercial street. New residential areas also took shape along different lines. Japanese areas were mostly built as 문화주택, it means cultural housing. districts with cultural housing districts, while Korean areas developed as urban Hanok districts. Both were responses to urban overcrowding, poor sanitation, and the need for housing improvement, but they took quite different forms. The 문화주택 featured glass windows for light and ventilation, aspiring to a Western residential model. 청파동 킨대. Yeah, this is also a representative 문화주택. Now it is used as a cafe, so maybe you can visit. And urban Hanok, by contrast, was small-scale Hanok without the traditional wing, check divisions, adapted to the rhythms of modern urban Korean life. You can still find many of Hanok, urban Hanoks in Bukchon area. By the 1930s, population overcrowding and the need for expansion have become the dominant challenges in Seoul. In 1934, the Joseon City Planning Ordinance was enacted. It was the first urban planning in Korea. In 1936, the Greater Keijo Plan was announced, a dramatic expansion of the city's administrative boundaries beyond their historic limits. So before 1936, this is Seoul's area. However, it was greatly expanded like this. Following the introduction of zoning under the Joseon City Planning Ordinance, the expanded city of Seoul was divided into industrial, commercial, residential, scenic, and aesthetic districts. The characteristics of these zoning districts have persisted to the present day and continue to shape the character of different parts of Seoul. For example, this is Itaewon Hannam-dong area. Yeah, it's designed as a high-class residential area, and it's the same too nowadays. Land readjustment project, 토지 구획 정리 사업, were also carried out on a significant scale. It became the primary planning instrument for Seoul's urban expansion from the 1930s onward. Land was reorganized while new roads and public facilities were constructed, creating planned urban areas from scratch. Yeongdeung-po is the first area where these projects were most intensively concentrated by the Great Taejoseon. In these areas, factories and housings were built side by side. The Muledong district, still largely intact today, is one such example. A residential area built to house the factory workers employed in Yeongdeung-po. In this district, standard type houses supplied by the Joseon Housing Corporation, Jutek Yeongdan, established in 1941, were constructed. 5 standard unit types were provided, enabling rapid and uniform construction across the district. What about the urban core? The early 1930s saw the first apartments appear in Seoul, initially provided as company housing for employees. This building is also survived. Yeah, it's a Bikuni company's apartment. They gradually became for sale or for rental apartments marketed to urban residents. These two, this is Chungjeong Apart. Original name is Toyota Apartment. This building is still remained. It's very close to our store. Okay, the last part. Liberation in 1945 and then the Korean War in 1950, these two events fundamentally recast the trajectory of Seoul. However, there was little immediate change after liberation. The government general building, for example, was simply occupied by the US military after the Japanese left. So here are American soldiers and here are Japanese soldiers. The urban landscape also remained largely unchanged. Only the rulers has changed from Japanese to American and from American to Korean. The change, however, was clearly reflected in place names. Honmachi, here, Honmachi, the former Japanese commercial street, was renamed Chonmuro after the title the admiral Lee Sun-shin. Many other colonial place names were either restored to their earlier Korean names, like Ujiro, or renamed after national heroes. However, the Korean War brought widespread destruction. The area north of Cheonggyecheon, including the royal palaces, cultural heritage sites, and government institutions, was largely spared from bombing, survived from bombing through coordination with the US military. In contrast, Namcheon, this is Yongsan and this is maybe near the Myeongdong. They were suffered severe damage because these places were occupied by Japanese residents before, so they were bombed. However, those sides, which have royal palaces and cultural heritage, were survived. It was because the coordination with the US military. After the war, reconstruction began primarily through land adjustment projects, like in the 1930s. The areas shown in red and blue, this map, are the districts where these post-war reconstruction projects were carried out, because these areas were bombed and disrupted. So these are most of these disrupted parts below the Cheonggye Street, the south part. Another important change came in 1958 when minimum building height regulations were introduced. Buildings along roads wider than 25 meters were required to be at least three stories high and fireproof, while buildings along major streets such as Namdaemun-no, Uljiro, and Chonno had to be at least 5 stories high. These regulations laid the foundation for the urban skyline of central Seoul that we see today. In the early 1960s, the government sought to address the housing shortage by promoting mixed-use buildings along major streets such as Namdaemun-no and Uljiro. These buildings typically combined commercial space of the lower floors with residential units above, so 1 and 2 stories occupied by commercial ones, and the upper stories are residential. Another central changes in post-war reconstruction was the acute housing shortage. The Korean National Housing Corporation, KNHC, former Joseon National Housing Corporation, established in 1941 by Japanese, proceeded to build a wide range of housing types across the country. Large-scale residential complexes were developed in other districts of Seoul, 정릉동, 회기동, 홍제동, 자미동, and elsewhere. And this is 자미동. There are construction housing, 공공 housing, 국민 housing. So there are so many housing complexes. Housing types also evolved rapidly. The Nanpyeong row houses of the 19 Nanpyeong will be okay here. Nanpyeong is 27 square meter. So it is very small. So the Nanpyeong row houses of the 1950s gave way to at least 12평 plus national housing units in the 1960s. The standard plan featured a central living room flanked by living room and bedrooms on each side, and the kitchen and the toilet to the left, and 3-bay structure. After the post-war construction period, Seoul continued to develop at a remarkable pace. During the era of economic development since 1962, construction was actively promoted under the slogan "Build with a fighting spirit." The 1966 Seoul Master Plan was the first major urban master plan prepared after liberation. Its main goals were the development of sub-centers, expansion of the transportation network, improvement of the water supply systems and urban infrastructure, and large-scale housing construction. The plan promoted the development of new sub-centers like Yeongdong, and Yeongdong is nowadays Gangnam and Seongbu, Eunpyeong, and so on. And Seoul was greatly expanded the urban area. This boundary was the 1936 the Great Daeso Plan boundary. However, nowadays in 1966, Seoul was expanded like this. So you can see the changes of Seoul's boundary. It is 1914 and 1936 and 1966. The boundary established during this expansion largely corresponds to the Seoul we know today. It also proposed an extensive transportation network, including arterial roads, expressways, and the subway systems. At the same time, major infrastructure such as water supply and city gas systems were planned, and it includes public housing programs and the reconstruction of the traditional monuments. To address the severe housing shortage, the government launched a large-scale public housing program. As a result, many informal hillside settlements were cleared. Yeah, there were informal settlements, but they were cleared and replaced with public apartment complexes. One notable example is Hwaehyang Citizens Apartment here, this one, which was built on a steep slope. Because of the terrain, yeah, you can see the 석춘 stone walls. It appears to be 10 stories from the front, but only 5 stories from the rear. Seowon-sanga was also built during this period. The site was cleared as Sokaikuchi, Sokegungji, and evacuation fire break zones during the colonial period, actually the wartime. After liberation and the Korean War, it became informal settlement. In 1967, it was cleared and it was redeveloped into the last mixed-use complex known as Seungsan-ga. It was a huge mega structure. In the late 1960s, Cheonggyecheon was covered over and an elevated highway was constructed. High-rise buildings, including mixed-use residential and commercial buildings, lined the newly constructed highway. However, in 2005, the elevated highway was removed and Cheonggyecheon was restored. Meanwhile, Seosomun apartment was built on top of a covered street, Manchocheon. In the late 1960s, apartment complexes were pursued as a new solution to the housing crisis. Mapo apartment, this one, marks the beginning of the complex-style apartment in Korea. This is the diagram of Mapo apartment. This shows the contrast single-story housing settlements with apartment complexes. The latter presents as the necessary foundation of a new way of relational life. So, around 1970, larger apartment complexes were built along the Han River. This is Yeouido Sibom, and this is Hangang-Mansion apartment. And apartments gradually transformed from housing for the poor, the low-income families, into a symbol of middle-class aspiration. And it continues today. From the 1970s onward, large-scale apartment complexes were built in tandem with the development of Gangnam area. Housing provision expanded beyond the KNHC to the private sector. This iconic photograph shows Apgujeong Hyundai apartment under construction, a vivid image of the dynamic hybridity that defines Seoul's urban development. Okay, what about architecture during this period? After the Korean War, European and American modernism became the dominant architectural language, supported by aid from the United States and the United Nations. Representative examples include the National Museum and National Museum of Korean Contemporary History, this one, and the other is the now American Embassy. But these two buildings were built as Yusong Building. After liberation, Korean architects embraced modernism as the dominant architectural style for the three major reasons. First, they could no longer follow the architectural styles associated with Japanese colonial law. Second, Western classicism also evoked memories of colonial domination, like government general building. Third, modernism as an international architectural language was regarded as the most politically neutral choice. However, the situation changed in the 1960s. As part of post-colonial nation building, traditional architecture began to be immersive. The 1966 Seoul Master Plan proposed relocating Gwanghwamun, which had been displaced by the Japanese government building. However, instead of reconstructing it in timber using traditional techniques, It was rebuilt in reinforced concrete for reasons of efficiency and practicality. The Liberty Center, designed by Kim Soo-gun, was built for the Second Conference of the Asian People's Anti-Communist League and was very much a product of the Cold War. While expressing the material qualities of exposed concrete, it also incorporated elements inspired by traditional Korean architecture. Other architects, including Kim Jung-wook and Lee Hee-tae, also sought to reinterpret traditional Korean architecture. They focused particularly on roof forms, experimenting with ways of incorporating traditional elements, such as tiled roof or thatched roof, like this, into modern architecture. However, the Real National Museum, completed in 1970, sparked controversy because of its perceived resemblance to a Japanese Shinto shrine. The debate became an important turning point in discussions about the authenticity of Korean tradition. Nevertheless, attempts to revive tradition continued. One of the central questions in the competition for the National Museum of Korea was how traditional architectural elements such as Palsamjeong and Busa could be reinterpreted in a modern building. The winning proposal, this one, by Kang Bong-jin, often described as a concrete hanok, became one of the most influential examples in the continuing debate over how to reconcile tradition and modernity in Korean national architecture. Ironically, the building was an icon of post-colonial state architecture, is now scheduled for demolition as part of Gyeongbokgung restoration plan. The Gyeongbokgung restoration plan is, here you can see the comparison before the reconstruction and after reconstruction. It was designed to mark the 600th anniversary of the founding of Hanseong as the Joseon capital. Its central ambition to recover the palace that was largely dismantled under Japanese colonial rule. Carried out under the banner of correcting history, 역사 감세우기, the project involved demolishing the Japanese government general building, there was the government building in the 1990s. However, it was dismantled in 1995 and restored Gyeongbokgung Palace and restored the Gwanghwamun Gate to the late 19th century form. The restoration is still ongoing. This project is part of Korea's broader process of post-colonial nation building. Here is Gwanghwamun and the buildings of Gyeongbokgung Palace. Gwanghwamun had been rebuilt in reinforced concrete in the 1960s, was restored was again in traditional timber construction this is the newly reconstructed Gwanghwamun with traditional technology in the 2000s. And the Woldae, you can see here, Woldae, the ceremonial stone platform in front of the Gwanghwamun Gate was also reconstructed in maybe 2023 or 4. Okay, Now let me level my lecture. Today we have traced Seoul's urban transformation across three historical periods. First, Hanseong engaged with its Asian city, making philosophers, but transformed them radically through the logic of natural topography and geometry. Second, colonial Keijo saw the city space unequally reorganized under the banner of modernization. Modern infrastructure and urban planning inseparable from ethnic segregation. Third, post-war Seoul rose from the ruins of war to become a megacity within decades, continuously redefining itself between tradition and modernity, colonial legacy, and national identity. Seoul is a city of hybridity. When you walk through its street, you encounter Joseon palaces, the colonial era road grid, post-war reconstruction buildings, and the development projects of 1970s and 80s, all at once, or in the same field of vision. That layering is Seoul's dynamism comes from that very hybridity. Okay, I hope today's lecture has helped you understand the city's urban landscape. Please enjoy this hybrid and dynamic city Seoul. Thank you. Is there any questions or comments? Yeah, I brought several books about Seoul's urban organization and colonization, and I added some references at the end of the handbooks. So yeah, maybe most of them are written in Korean, but you have AI, so you can translate it. And these are a very good archives. So you can find many images and many movies about Seoul around the 20th century. Okay?
Okay, someone have a question?
Yeah. I have two very brief questions. First of all, thank you so much for your lecture. It was really helpful. My first question is, how do you define the engine of these changes? Behind
Okay.
these urban changes, and even though, as you said, if everything is changing and everything is a hybrid, but I guess as an architect, maybe we could see the urban form of Seoul. Through the urban form, maybe we can learn the collective memory. So could you please elaborate more about the collective memory of Seoul?
Memory of Seoul. Okay. The first question is about the engine of urban changes. Maybe the engine. It's not a brief question. It's a very comprehensive question. But I think the engine of this rapid change is the population. There was rapid growth of population, so we need to respond it. So there was the city improvement plan or urban planning, and even before the planning, the construction was executed because to respond the demand for the growth of population. And the second question is collective memory of Seoul. Yeah, it is very diverse. Someone has a very positive memory in Seoul because yeah, considerably rich towns. They have a very positive memories, and Seoul is a kind of utopia. However, Seoul has also a very dark side, like industrial zones. There are a very small and very unconditioned workers' housing like Berjib. Do you know Berjib? Berjib is a small housing unit for looks like a beehive. So their memory is a kind of traumatic. So the collective memory is also very diverse, and who has the memory, whether who has the memory is very different from people's experience. So yeah, it's a very stupid answer, but yeah, I cannot explain it. But there are very very diverse layers of memories too.
Thank you for your lecture. And I wonder if there are any other cities with similar hybrid characteristics and histories. Because as for Taiwan also
Yes,
requires
in China,
occupation
Taipei.
and civil conflict. So I was wondering.
Yes, yes. As you said, Taipei is very similar, similar urban conditions like Seoul, because they shared a similar historical background from colonial occupation and the inner war between democracy part and communist part, and rapid economic growth and explosive growth of population. So, and Taipei also has a Taipei also has the same philosophy, not philosophy, the same concept in national building in the 1970s, 60s or 70s. So we have the architect Kim Soo-hoon, but Taiwan has the architect Wang Da-hong. Wang Da-hong's architecture is very similar to Kim Soo-hoon. He also tried to mingle the modern technology with traditional elements, like traditional very very big roof, or the circle 월문. 월문 means the moon gate. Yeah, it is a very traditional element of Korean architecture. So I think Taipei is the most similar city to Seoul. And Taipei, yes, Taipei. And maybe the other cities in Changchun, nowadays Changchun, it was Sinkyô in the 1970s, 1930s. Changchun is a Chinese city. It was the capital of Manchukuo. It is also very similar to Taipei and Seoul. However, Changchun was a small town before colonization, so a little bit different. Yeah, but Changchun and Taipei and Seoul shared a lot of things. Okay.
Thank you for the lecture. I had a question because when we've been walking around the city, the thing that has been intriguing us the most is kind of the mix of old and new. But it sounds like some of the old is not actually old; it's kind of new, imitating old or modern adaptations. I was wondering what kind of the public perception of the mix of old and new is. and
Public
people like it
perception?
or don't like it.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe about 10 or 20 years ago, people dislike it because they thought it is because the hybrid scenes, the hybrid scenes with old building and new buildings was regarded as a symbol of undeveloped country. Okay. However, nowadays, especially the young people likes to visit the old places like Eujiro or Seongsu-dong. There are so many old factories and old housings nowadays used as cafes or cultural facilities. So I think maybe there are gap between the young people and the old people. Old people still dislike it, but the young people, yeah, somewhat likes it.
Okay. Right. If you don't have questions, we will finalize today's lectures. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you want to look the books, I can borrow it during the AAB's
Okay.
period. So yeah, please. Maybe I think this week is only the English written book. Yeah, English book, and this is about the colonial city of Seoul, and it is a very political conception, and maybe okay. This book is a city and about our city and architecture of Seoul since 1960s. So you can easily understand the current condition of Seoul with this book. Okay.
Okay. So I put the studio spaces next to the building, next to the room. Okay? Thank you. Alright, so time to go back to the studio spaces.